Starting with our custom hook, we first import useState and useEffect from React. useState will be used to keep track of the data, loading status, and error state. useEffect will handle the side effect of fetching the data when the component is mounted or when the URL changes. Here we define the custom hook called useFetch. It is a function that takes a single argument, URL, which is the endpoint from which we want to fetch data. Within the hook, we create a piece of state called data, initialized to null. This will store the actual data we fetch. setData is the function well used to update this state once we have our data. We also set up a loading state, initialized to true. This will let our components know that the data is currently being fetched. Similarly, we prepare an error state, initialized to null. If something goes wrong during the data fetch, this state will be updated with the error information. Now, we utilize the useEffect hook. This will dictate when the data fetching should occur, specifically on component mount and when the URL changes. Inside useEffect, we define an asynchronous function called fetchData. This function will handle the asynchronous logic of fetching the data. We use a try-catch block to manage the data fetching process. It enables us to handle any errors gracefully. Within the try block, we first await the result of fetch called with the URL provided. This attempts to retrieve the data from the given endpoint. We check if the response is not OK, indicating a network error, and if so, throw an error. This error will then be caught and handled in the catch block. If the response is successful, we then proceed to parse the JSON data from the response using response.json. The retrieved data is then passed to setData, which updates our data state. If any errors occur during the fetch or processing of the data, we catch them here. Errors caught are then used to update the error state with setError, so that our components can respond accordingly. The finally block will execute regardless of the try and catch outcome. It's the perfect place to make state updates that should happen after the fetch attempt, such as setting the loading state to false. Here we set the loading state to false, indicating that the fetching process has completed. Finally, we invoke fetchData and pass URL as a dependency to useEffect. This ensures that fetchData is rerun whenever URL changes. Our hook concludes by returning an object containing the data, loading, and error states. This makes it easy for components to destructure and use these values. Lastly, we export useFetch as the default export of this module, so it can be imported and used by other components. Now let's see how to use our custom hook in a component. First, we import React and our custom hook useFetch. We define a functional component called DataComponent which takes a prop called DataSource. This prop will be the URL that our hook needs to fetch data from. Inside the component, we call useFetch with DataSource and destructure data, loading, and error from the returned object. We add a conditional rendering statement. If the component is currently loading, it will return a paragraph element with the text loading. Similarly, if there was an error fetching the data, the component will display the error message. Finally, if the data has been successfully fetched and is ready, we render a div containing a heading and a pre-formatted block of JSON data. The JSON stringify method is used to convert the data object into a string that can be displayed on the web page.